Hey everybody, it's Chris, and welcome to part 7 of the Bible study series. And wow, here we go. We are picking up in chapter 9 of Genesis. And obviously, we are coming out of chapters 6, 7, and 8, where wow, we just dove into this flood and everything that was taking place, how mankind and our disobedience and not listening and just evil, continual evil, how that was affecting him. And we just, even more so, we were not repenting. There was no turning, changing our ways to repent. And this just crushed God. And here he brings about this flood to wipe it all away, to cleanse the world of all this evil and corruption. And yet at the same time, he was still ensuring salvation. He was ensuring hope and safety and refuge from all this through the faith and obedience and absolute complete trust of Noah to build this ark that would rise above the waters and and lead them and lead him, his family, and all the animals that he had into the ark to this new land, this new world that had just been cleansed. And here we go. We're about to get into this new covenant, a new promise between God and man, between God and Noah and all of creation. And it's such an amazing thing. And I want to say, hey, uh, stop this, time out. If you have not read through the previous chapters, or especially if you didn't watch part 6, the last video, please do that because of what is at the heart of all that, of all this that took place, everything that happened. At the very core of that message, at the very core of this whole thing, it was pointing to Jesus Christ in such an amazing way. How that ark, the ark of salvation, and how Noah's faith and obedience to be able to enter, to come under the covering and safety of that salvation, and what it led to and everything, and just how that correlated with our Savior Jesus Christ is just it's absolutely mind blowing. That experience was like a flood, of the Spirit and everything. It's just a great thing. So I certainly hope, guys. I am praying, spending a lot of time in this stuff, and I am absolutely praying that you are getting something out of this. And I pray that you're praying each and every time, with this word, that you're discovering, and that God's just revealing more and more and more about himself and his firstborn of creation, Jesus Christ. And just how all of this is playing out is amazing. So again, please pray before we get into this. And here we go. We're getting into chapter 9. And if you remember, at the very end of chapter 8, we started getting into God's promise, and it was really cool. He first began, making a promise with himself, and he said, "I will never again curse the ground because of the human race, even though everything they think or imagine is bent toward evil from childhood. I'll never again destroy all living things." This was something God was saying and promising, saying to himself, which is so crazy. And we're going to pick up on the next two parts of this promise here in chapter 9. So here we go. God's going to confirm his covenant with man, and we're going to start repopulating the earth. So it says, God blessed Noah and his sons, and he told them, "Be fruitful and multiply. Go and fill the earth." So remember, when God first made man, when he just came into this new creation, the first thing that he commanded Adam, right, to do was to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. And so here we go, Noah and his sons, right? They're coming into basically this new creation that was just cleansed of everything. They're coming into it, and God says, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth." And check this out. It says, "All the animals of the earth, all the birds of the sky, the small animals, and all the fish in the sea, they will look on you with fear and terror, because I have placed them in your power." He says, "I have given them to you for food, just as I have given them or given you grain and vegetables. So remember, before we had, we've got grain, vegetables, plants, trees that were providing fruits and everything like that. And now animals are also being placed, in our power in order to sustain us. They're being given to us for food, just as with the grains and vegetables and everything like that. Here goes something interesting in verse 4 where it says, "But you must never eat any meat that still has the lifeblood in it." All right. And I wanted to point this out because you might not think much of this right now. We're going to pick up on a few things. Please make a note of this, highlight it, mark it so that we can come back to this, because we're going to get to another book where we're going to sort of expand on something with this, talking about the lifeblood and everything. And there's such an importance with this. So keep that in mind, and it'll kind of continue here. So it says in verse 5, "And I will require the blood of anyone who takes another person's life." All right, so check this out. Remember back when we met Cain, and this dude just murdered his little brother Abel, who was good and righteous in the Lord's eyes, and Cain murdered him out of anger and jealousy and hate. Right, and we kind of question the consequence, the sentence, that God gave, with all of that, the punishment. We're like, why was it that way? Remember, we talked about that. We mentioned there was not yet a command or a law that was set in place regarding this, right? And so here we go, and notice this, how we just came out of all of this violence before the flood, right? The very thing that caused the flood, there was so much war and violence had just filled the earth, so much corruption. This was the very thing that was breaking God's heart. So we got to think there was a lot of blood being shed. There was a lot of killing, murdering going on. And so here we go. I will require the blood of anyone who takes another person's life. This is a command right here, a law. Even if a wild animal kills a person, it must die. And anyone who murders a fellow human must die. If anyone takes a human life, that person's life will also be taken by human hands. There's an accountability there, right? And it says, I love this at the end, "For God made man in his own image." Right? So all of that to say, notice how important that is to God. Remember, we just came out of all of this chaos, killing, and corruption, and everything that was going on. People were, just ending pieces of God's creation, right? And especially made in his own, out of his own image. Remember, God and Jesus Christ, the instrument of creation, they came together to create us in their own image. And these were things that were being destroyed with all of this war and violence. So God, here he comes. He says, man, we're not going to do this. Here's the law, here's the command, and here's the consequence for it. There's going to be accountability. Not going to put up with this. Right? And I love what the study Bible says about that right there. It says here here God explains why murder is so wrong. To kill a person is to kill one made in God's image. Because all human beings are made in God's image, all people possess the qualities that distinguish them from everything else: morality, reason, creativity, and self-worth. So when we interact with others, we are interacting with beings made by God, beings to whom God offers eternal life. God wants us to recognize his image in all people. So guys, this blood, I will require the blood, this lifeblood, and your, man, my image. Be careful with this, right? This is something huge here, very important to God. And so he says after that, verse 7, now go, right, Noah, be fruitful and multiply and repopulate the earth. All right, and here's where we start getting into the part of God's covenant. And verse 8 says, then God told Noah and his sons, I hereby confirm my covenant with you and your descendants, and with all the animals that were on the boat with you, every living creature on earth. Yes, I am confirming my covenant with you. So it's like, hey, remember what I said to you right before the ark and all this and the flood happened? I said I was going to confirm my covenant with you. And here we go. Chapter 9, verse 11. Yes, Noah, I am confirming my covenant with you. Look what he says right here. Never again will floodwaters kill all living creatures. Never again will a flood destroy the earth. So remember, back at the end of chapter 8, God said, never again will he curse the ground, will he curse the earth, right, because of mankind and all of our evil. And, and here he goes. Never again will floodwaters kill all living creatures. Never again will a flood destroy the earth. And not only that, there we go. There's the covenant, right? There's the part of the promise with mankind and all of the descendants, all of creation, all of the animals, everything. This covenant was covering everything. What does God do next? Here comes the last part of this covenant, is that he seals it with a sign. So God, he's saying something, and he is also going to give us a sign that seals up this covenant. In verse 12, it says, God said, I am giving you a sign of my covenant with you and with all living creatures for all generations to come. I have placed my rainbow in the clouds. It is the sign of my covenant with you and all the earth. When I send clouds over the earth, the rainbow will appear in the clouds, and I will remember my covenant with you and with all living creatures. Never again will the floodwaters destroy all life. When I see the rainbow in the clouds, I will remember the eternal covenant between God and every living creature on earth. Yes, Noah. Yes, this rainbow right here is the sign of the covenant I am confirming with all the creatures of the earth. Oh, man, I love this right here. All right. So, first of all, is the obvious, right? We talked about the end of chapter 8, very end, in verse 22, where God says it's a sign as well. As long as the earth remains, there will be planting and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night. Guys, those are things, those are signs, those are things that we can see and experience right now that ensure us that God is sticking with his promise that he would never again curse the ground. And here we go. We can see his covenant. We can see the sign of his promise, his covenant of this. Never again will a flood destroy the earth. We can see the symbol of this promise even today. This is amazing. Whenever we see that rainbow, in the sky, it's not just a, science where it's, water and the light hits it and boom, oh, pretty colors. Go, guys, this was something God placed here as a sign, as a symbol of remembrance of all of this and his promise that he is making all the way back here thousands of years ago. My daughter, my kids, they love rainbows. Obviously, most people do. And she asked, well, how does it take place? How does it happen? And we talked about the generic stuff first, and then we got into this. I said, but you know what it really means? What the rainbow, what it really stands for. We talked about this and she said, Daddy, so that's crazy. Something that we can see now is telling us about what God said so long ago. And it's like, yes, think about that. Think of how crazy that is and how just amazing that is, that we can still experience that now. And here's some things that I want to point out further about this is that one thing he says in verse 16, I will remember the eternal covenant between God and every living creature on earth. Okay? Think about this for a second, right? God is saying this covenant, this promise, this is eternal. He says, never again will this happen. Basically, what just took place, right, with the floodwaters and everything that came about in the last few chapters we just read, everything that just took place, that will never again happen. This is an eternal covenant. Think about that, right? An eternal promise between God, between Him and us, every living creature on earth. All right, think about that. Hang on to it, right? Remember, we were meant to be here on earth forever. Like, this is kind of giving us some more clues about that eternal covenant between God and everything on earth. Hello, okay. So here's the next thing in verse 13. Whew. Notice how he says, I have placed my rainbow in the clouds. He didn't say, I have placed a rainbow. He says, I have placed my rainbow in the clouds. And I know we haven't gotten there yet. I just want to point this out to kind of give you some context of what this is talking about. Because later on, we're going to see in some of the the imagery, that we're kind of shown about God's dwelling place, up in that heaven, the heaven of heavens, God's throne and what is over his throne, where he dwells, where he sits is a rainbow. So think about this, guys, is that God is taking something from heaven, from where he dwells, and placing it here on earth as a symbol to tell us, that this covenant, that this is eternal, that what God is saying, this is going to remind us forever. And man, something else just hit me. Hang on a second. Whoa. Man. All right, so wow, sorry, I had to think about that for a second because something just hit me as I was reading through that again and talking through that. Wow, again, look at how this points to Jesus Christ. Look at how this correlates. Oh my goodness. Okay, God taking something from heaven to become this symbol of an eternal promise for all of mankind and every living creature on earth. Wow, what does that make you think of? Gee, wow. I just now got that, and that is blowing my mind. I'm telling you guys, if you read this, it doesn't matter how many times you read this. Are you something else is going to hit you. That is crazy. And here's the thing is that, man, I got to think about that more. I got to remember to write a note about that. we're going to be introduced to other covenants that God makes with man, and then obviously, yeah, that final covenant with His Son Jesus Christ coming down from His throne out of heaven to be the symbol of, wow. Yeah, we're gonna have to come. Wow, just make a note. Maybe I'm going off, left field or something. I don't know, but that is pretty cool. Sorry, that just hit me, and I had to just kind of talk it out for a second. But guys, we're gonna see, we're gonna see how these covenants and everything, how they play out. More that are gonna be introduced and everything. And again, the final, ultimate covenant of Jesus Christ and everything is awesome. And again, God says He will remember the eternal covenant between God and every living creature on earth. Again, this earth, everything where we are, this us was meant to be eternal here. Hang on to that. Okay? That is awesome. So guys, reflect on that as you see a rainbow. And that's a cool thing. Not only is it a reminder for God, He doesn't need to remember, but He can be reminded or focus, on this. But we can as well. And think about this. We're not just remembering the promise, that such grace and the promise moving forward, but we're also able to look back and remember everything that took place leading up to that point. That rainbow isn't just a symbol. Remember, it's a symbol of something after the storm. The rainbow appears after the storm in the clouds. So this tells us we're able to look back and think of what the clouds, like what was happening in this storm of all corruption and evil that was taking place, and how that was affecting God, but still out of all of it is this symbol of such hope and beauty coming out of it. Hopefully that makes sense, right? So, okay, moving on from there, because I don't want this to go, these videos can get long, but we start talking about Noah's sons here, okay? And it says that the sons of Noah who came out of the boat with their father were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And from these three sons of Noah came all the people who now populate the earth. Okay? And so in verse 20 it says, after the flood, Noah began to cultivate the ground and he planted a vineyard. Okay? In some of the other translations it says, after the flood, Noah was a man of the soil. And so you remember Adam, right? That when he was out of the Garden of Eden, he had to start cultivating, working the ground. He became a farmer. He passed that along to Cain, and right, this was a very important thing to, be able to live. They had to farm. They had to cultivate the ground so it produced. And so this tells us a little bit more about Noah, is that the first thing that he did, one of the first things is he began to cultivate the ground. And so that's crazy. This must have been something that he was experienced with, that he had done. And it gives us more insight to the ark, when he was, when God proposed to him, hey, you got to build this thing. That, man, this was out of his wheelhouse, because he was probably grown up knowing how to farm and everything. And so it says he planted a vineyard. And here's where it gets a little crazy. In verse 21, it says, one day he drank some wine which he had made, and he became drunk. Noah got just wasted, obliterated, drunk, and he laid naked inside his tent. Okay, now, quick time out. Remember, when we first met Noah, it talked about he was righteous and without, he was without blame, everything like that. Didn't mean he was without sin, right? And he never did anything wrong, because we're starting to see, where he's making a mistake right here, right? So, right, keep that in mind. So it says, hey, he just got wasted, and he was laying naked inside of his tent. And here's where it starts to get a little funky, weird, where one of his sons, his youngest son, Ham, right? He saw that his father was naked. So evidently he was inside the tent and Noah's just, passed out. He saw that his father was naked and he went outside and told his brothers. Okay? It's like, man, we don't have a lot of information. We don't quite know what was going on inside of the tent. You know, we don't need to speculate, but whatever it was, Ham obviously came outside and told his brothers about it. And what happens next kind of gives us the sense that maybe Ham was doing this in a mocking tone, like in a disgraceful way, trying to, bringing shame to Noah and his nakedness and his drunkenness, right? And everything. So, because what happens next is that his two older brothers, Shem and Japheth, they took a robe and they held it over their shoulders and backed into the tent to cover up their father. They wanted to cover up his nakedness, his shame, his drunkenness, right? And as they did this, they looked the other way so they would not see him naked. They would not see him that way. Okay, so obviously this was some sort of, big deal here. And Shem and Japheth, they did things. They handled it the correct way. And evidently Ham did not. Because watch what happens. When Noah woke up, right, he gets up and it's been a long night. He found out what Ham did, his youngest son. And then in verse 25, then he cursed Canaan, the son of Ham. Kind of weird. Notice that he didn't curse Ham, but he cursed his son, Canaan. Very, very key point here, and we'll figure out why in just a minute. He says, may Canaan be cursed. May he be the lowest of servants to his relatives. But then Noah said, may the Lord, the God of Shem, be blessed, and may Canaan be his servant. May God expand the territory of Japheth. May Japheth share the prosperity of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. All right, so here we go, guys. We're going to get a lot more information about what this means, what is taking place. We know already, we'll give you some insight, that this was a divine thing that was happening here. God's Spirit was a part of this. This wasn't something that God, Noah just woke up and he starts just, pointing the finger, at Ham's son, pointing at Canaan and just rattling off stuff out of anger. No, guys, this was prophetic. This was a prophecy that was given by the Spirit, and this curse that was taking place to Ham's son, to Canaan. And the reason why it talked about being the lowest of servants, a slave of slaves, servant of servants, is going to be this Canaan. And guys, I'm telling you, watch how this absolutely plays out and is fulfilled 100%. It is crazy. And so we're going to learn a lot more about Ham, the descendants of Ham, how they make up a majority of the African nation, a lot of descendants, a majority of people that were slaves. Canaan, again, we're going to discover big time exactly what happens and how all of that works out, and where they are going to be the lowest of servants out of all of this. It's absolutely crazy. Okay, so just hang on to that. I want you to do this, because at the end of chapter 9, obviously we find out that Noah, he lived 950 years and then he died. It's like, that was it. And it's like, Noah, man, you're so great, and how blessed we are, because of Noah. And it's like, man, this is kind of the end of hearing, or not hearing about him, but, of his lifetime. We'll hear a lot more about him as well, and how he's remembered and everything. But wow, this is crazy. Just think back. I want you to reflect on everything and just the amount of faith that it took, and try to put yourself in his shoes throughout all of these chapters in his life. 950 years. a faithful servant to the Lord. And it's crazy. We talk about, mistakes and sin and drunkenness. We'll get into alcohol and drinking and the perversion of that going on into drunkenness and that type of thing later on. But look how something like that can lead, to something that is going to change the course of an entire nation. Honestly, it really is. It's quite, it's crazy. So what I want you to do is I would like for you to continue reading through chapter 10. We're going to pick up in chapter 11, and it's going to go through the descendants of each of the three sons. And what I want you to notice is how, when it gets to the descendants of Ham, how it points out specifically one particular person here. And it's talking about this fellow who goes by the name, he's called Nimrod, right? You'll kind of read about that. Hold on to that. We're going to say, he builds a kingdom, Babylonia. We're going to be introduced to Babylon here. And this is a huge, huge part of the Bible and everything that's going on. I want you to read through that, focus on that. When we back up here in chapter 11, we're going to dive into a little bit more detail on who this guy was and what's about to happen here in Babylon and this Tower of Babel that we're going to be introduced to and everything like that. So read through chapter 10. We'll pick up there in chapter 11. And again, guys, reflect back, on our guy Noah. And wow, pray a prayer of thanks for his life and his many years and everything. Imagine that full year of being on that ark. And then obviously the time before that, the amount of time it took to stay faithful and obedient in the midst of all of the corruption and I'm sure the ridicule and adversity that he faced, to follow through with God's command and stay faithful to that and trust in him. And that led to not only his salvation, but hope for the rest of us on. And remember the three parts of that promise and how this is eternal, and it's something that we can see right here and right now in our lives. And we can be reminded not just of God's promise, but of everything that led up to that and how amazing and special and important that was. And I'm going to do some further reading into this thing where it just dawned on me about God. This was his taking something from his throne and it was given as a symbol of this eternal covenant. Man, that's something there that relates to Jesus Christ. And man, yeah. All right. So love you guys. We'll pick up in chapter 11. We'll go from there.